The church bells were supposed to ring in joy that morning, not mock her with their hollow echo. Eleanor stood at the altar, her hands trembling as she clutched a bouquet of roses that felt heavier by the second. Her family, friends, and neighbors filled the pews, their whispers rippling through the air like a cruel tide. The organ had played its final note, the priest had cleared his throat, and still, the groom never came. For an hour she waited, her smile cracking with each passing minute, her heart sinking into an abyss of humiliation. When it became undeniable, when the priest finally closed his book and someone had to help her down from the altar, she knew her life had just split into a before and an after. The man she loved, the man she trusted, had chosen her wedding day to reveal his cowardice. He left her, not with words, but with silence. In the weeks that followed, the whispers grew sharper, carried by neighbors who had always been too curious. They spoke of pity at first, then scandal, then ridicule. Some said she must have driven him away. Others suggested he had found someone better. The betrayal itself was brutal, but it was the public humiliation that carved the deepest wound. Eleanor cried, yes, but only for a time. Tears dried, shame hardened, and in its place came resolve. She would not beg, nor would she hide. Instead, she began to watch, to learn, and to plan. What no one knew, not even her closest friends, was that the man who had left her was not only her fiancé, but also her business partner in a small but growing company they had built together. He had charmed her with promises of love and loyalty, while quietly positioning himself to take everything she worked for. The revelation came late one night when she unlocked his abandoned desk and discovered the contracts. He had been in talks with investors, intending to cut her out once the deal was signed. Their marriage was never about love. It had been a smokescreen for control, an illusion to keep her blinded while he maneuvered the pieces. The betrayal was more than personal now. It was war. Eleanor took the next few months to craft a plan so precise, so calculated, that it seemed almost effortless when it unfolded. She gathered every document, every email, every shred of evidence he had carelessly left behind. She met quietly with lawyers, investors, and even journalists who had been eager for a scandal. Her silence in public was not weakness, it was patience. The moment arrived on what would have been their 6-month wedding anniversary. He had gone ahead with the investor meeting, expecting to emerge as the sole face of the company. Cameras were waiting, reporters eager to photograph the charming young businessman on the rise. He arrived with his new partner, a woman everyone now realized he had been courting long before leaving Eleanor at the altar. But when the contracts were unveiled, his confidence shattered. Eleanor walked into the room, flanked by lawyers and holding a portfolio that contained the one thing he hadn't expected: control. She had legally secured the patents, the intellectual property, and the controlling shares. Everything he had tried to take from her now belonged solely to her, all done quietly and perfectly within the law. The flash of cameras caught the moment his face paled, the crowd whispering just as they had whispered in that church months ago. But this time, it was not Eleanor who stood humiliated. It was him. The headlines the next morning told the story better than she ever could. Left at the altar, bride outsmarts ex-fiancé in shocking business takeover. The public who once pitted her now praised her as brilliant, strong, and unbreakable. Where once she had been a victim, now she was a force to be reckoned with. And as she walked into her office, the company now entirely hers, she carried no bouquet of roses, no trembling smile. Only a quiet satisfaction that revenge, when served with patience and precision, does more than hurt. It rewrites the ending. The morning of her wedding had dawned bright, the skies so impossibly blue that Eleanor believed even the heavens had conspired to bless her union. Her gown shimmered in the sunlight, each bead hand-stitched, each layer of lace sewn with hope. She remembered looking at herself in the mirror and whispering, "This is the beginning of forever." But forever never came. The church was crowded, family from near and far, friends who had watched her grow, neighbors who filled the pews out of curiosity as much as love. The organ played its triumphant melody, and Eleanor's father had led her down the aisle with a proud smile, whispering, "You deserve happiness, my girl." She reached the altar. She waited and waited. Minutes stretched into an hour, each second a needle puncturing her chest. The priest coughed awkwardly, the whispers began, and the roses in her hands seemed to wither under the heat of so many eyes. When someone finally admitted that the groom had been spotted leaving town that very morning with a suitcase, Eleanor could no longer feel her legs. Her father caught her as she collapsed onto the first pew, her veil slipping down like a curtain on a play that had ended before the first act. The humiliation was unbearable. Strangers whispered as she left the church, the dress dragging like an anchor across the cobblestones. Some pitied her, others smirked with cruel curiosity. That night, Eleanor stared at herself in the mirror, still in her gown, makeup streaked with tears, and thought, "He didn't just leave me. He destroyed me in front of everyone." But the truth, she would soon discover, was worse. Weeks later, while sorting through paperwork in the office she shared with him, she opened his desk drawer and found contracts, pages and pages detailing meetings with investors. Her name was nowhere on them. The company they had built together, her ideas, her sleepless nights, her sacrifices, was about to be signed over entirely to him. The realization hit her like a storm. He never loved me. I was only a distraction, a shield, a partner he could discard once he secured control. The pain twisted into rage. Yet Eleanor did not scream, nor did she break. Instead, she whispered to her reflection one night, "If you wanted me gone, you should have buried me, because I am coming back stronger." From that moment, she moved with quiet precision. She contacted lawyers in secret, gathering evidence that proved her rightful ownership of patents and designs. She met with investors privately, showing them that she, not he, was the true mind behind their success. She built alliances in silence, even reaching out to a journalist who promised, "When the time comes, the world will hear your side." For months, she allowed the world to think she was broken, a discarded bride licking her wounds. But beneath that mask, she was sharpening her blade. The day of his grand unveiling arrived. Her ex-fiancé, dressed in a tailored suit, stood before cameras at a luxurious hotel ballroom, his new lover at his side. Flashbulbs lit the air as reporters praised him as a visionary entrepreneur. He smiled the same smile he once used on Eleanor, charming and false, and raised a glass. "To new beginnings," he declared. The doors at the back of the room opened. He faltered when he saw her, Eleanor, in a sleek black dress, no veil, no roses, only fire in her eyes. She walked slowly, deliberately, each heel striking the marble like a gavel. The crowd turned, whispers rising in waves. "What is she doing here?" someone muttered. Her ex tried to maintain composure. "Eleanor, this isn't the place." "Oh, it's exactly the place," she interrupted, her voice steady, commanding. She handed a folder to the lead investor, who opened it and paled. Murmurs spread like wildfire. "These documents," Eleanor continued, "prove that the company, its patents, and its designs belong to me. Every step of development came from my work. She pointed at her ex, who had begun to sweat under the lights, tried to erase me. He failed." The investors demanded explanations. Cameras clicked furiously. His charm melted into panic as he stammered, This is nonsense." But Eleanor wasn't finished. She pulled out another document, this one stamped and sealed by the courts. "As of last week, I am the sole legal owner of the company. Every contract he signed is void. Every deal he made is worthless. The business he tried to steal is mine." Gasps filled the room. Reporters shouted questions, investors turned their backs on him, and his new lover slipped quietly out the side door. Eleanor allowed herself a small smile. For once, he was the one left standing in shame. The next day, the headlines exploded across newspapers and online platforms. Jilted bride outsmarts ex-fiancé in stunning corporate takeover. Humiliation turned triumph. Woman betrayed at altar claims victory in business war. Eleanor became a symbol, not of pity, but of power. Her company thrived, investors rallying behind her brilliance. When she walked through the city streets now, people did not whisper mockery. They whispered admiration. And every time she passed the old church, she looked at the bells and thought, "You rang for me once in shame. Now you ring for my triumph." Eleanor Whitmore grew up believing in happy endings. She was the kind of girl who lingered at bookshops, flipping through love stories, imagining that someday her life would mirror those pages. Her parents had been sweethearts from their teenage years, and their quiet devotion set a standard in her heart. She dreamed of a man who would look at her with the same unshakable loyalty her father gave her mother. When she met Daniel, he seemed like the answer to that unspoken prayer. He was charming in a way that made entire rooms tilt toward him. He had a laugh that filled spaces, a confidence that drew people in. He noticed Eleanor when no one else did, and for a woman who had always lived half in the shadows of her own shyness, that attention was intoxicating. He spoke of partnership, of building a future together, not only in life but in business. Eleanor had always been clever with ideas, particularly in design and product development. Daniel, on the other hand, was magnetic with people. Together, they seemed unstoppable. Friends called them a power couple. Investors praised their potential. Eleanor thought, "This is it. This is the forever I was promised." The engagement came swiftly. A glittering diamond slipped onto her hand during a rooftop dinner. Cameras flashed as strangers cheered, and Daniel kissed her like a man claiming the world. She cried from joy that night, whispering to him, "Don't ever leave me." But as the months wore on, cracks appeared, hairline fractures Eleanor ignored because love had made her blind. Daniel traveled often, claiming business trips. He guarded his phone more closely than before. There were times he seemed distracted, detached, his gaze drifting past her as if she were fading wallpaper. She told herself all couples experienced strain before the wedding. She told herself his distance was nerves. She clung to the fairy tale. The day of the wedding should have been her triumph. The gown was exquisite, custom-made after endless fittings. Guests filled the church in eager anticipation. Eleanor had been nervous, yes, but excited beyond words. She stood at the altar, heart pounding, waiting for Daniel to appear through those carved wooden doors. He never came. Whispers grew into a low roar. The priest shifted uncomfortably. Eleanor's father whispered into her ear, "Stay strong," even as his hand trembled on hers. After an hour, someone finally muttered the words that shattered her. "He's gone."
Gone.
The humiliation was unbearable. She could feel eyes burning into her, could hear muffled gasps, pity dripping from lips that would retell her shame again and again. She left the church in silence, each step heavier than the last. Her veil dragged behind her, catching dust instead of dreams. That night, she locked herself in her room. The wedding dress crumpled on the floor like a dead thing. For days she couldn't eat. For weeks she could barely breathe without tasting bitterness. People avoided her in the street, either out of pity or curiosity, their glances sharp as knives. She felt as if the whole town was laughing behind their curtains. And then came the drawer. It was late one evening when she went to the office, their office. Daniel hadn't been there in weeks, abandoning both her and their business. As she rifled through the documents, she found them, contracts, proposals, and letters of intent. He had been preparing to push her out. All those nights she had worked until her hands ached, all those ideas she had bled onto paper, it was her genius, but his name alone appeared on the agreements. The truth seared her. He hadn't just betrayed her at the altar. He had been betraying her all along. The wedding wasn't the start of forever. It was a curtain to cover the theft he had orchestrated behind her back. That night, Eleanor made herself a promise. "You will not break me. You will regret underestimating me." The transformation was slow, methodical. She taught herself to hide her fury behind smiles. She sat through coffee with friends, pretending to be fragile, all while plotting. She built an army of lawyers, financial advisors, and silent allies. Every document she discovered became a weapon. Every whispered rumor became fuel. Daniel, meanwhile, flourished, or so it seemed. He was seen with a new woman, a striking brunette whose presence stirred gossip. He paraded through town as though nothing had happened, charming investors with that same smile that once belonged to Eleanor. People said he was unstoppable, destined for greatness. But Eleanor waited. She waited through the winter, through the whispers, through the loneliness that gnawed at her at night. She crafted her revenge like an artist painting a masterpiece, patient brushstroke after patient brushstroke. When spring came, so did the day of his great unveiling. The hotel ballroom sparkled with chandeliers, investors in sleek suits buzzing with excitement. Cameras lined the back walls, journalists poised with pens and microphones. Daniel stood at the center, his arm around his new lover, flashing the confident grin that once fooled Eleanor. "This company," he said proudly, "is the future. Together, we will lead innovation into a new era." The applause was thunderous. He basked in it, raising his glass in a toast. And then the doors opened. Eleanor stepped inside, dressed not in white lace but in black silk, sleek and sharp. The room fell silent. For a moment, Daniel's confident mask cracked, his smile faltering. "Eleanor," he muttered, the microphone catching the tremor in his voice. She walked forward, heels echoing like a judge's gavel. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice cool, controlled. She handed a thick folder to the lead investor. He opened it, scanned the pages, and his eyes widened in disbelief. "These documents," Eleanor said, her gaze never leaving Daniel's, "prove my ownership of the patents and designs. The company you've all been told belongs to Daniel was built on my work, and legally it is mine." The room erupted. Reporters shouted. Cameras flashed. Investors turned on Daniel, demanding answers. His new lover slipped away unnoticed, her face pale. Daniel stammered, sweat beading on his forehead, but Eleanor was relentless. She unveiled court orders, sealed agreements, and evidence of his deceit. Each word she spoke was a blade, cutting away his reputation piece by piece. By the end, Daniel stood alone, his empire in ruins. Eleanor had not only reclaimed what was hers, but exposed him as a fraud before the world. The next morning, her face graced the headlines. From jilted bride to corporate queen. Humiliation turned to triumph. Eleanor Whitmore's revenge. She didn't smile when she read them. She didn't need to. For Eleanor, victory wasn't about the applause, the headlines, or the whispered admiration. It was about standing in front of the mirror once more, stronger, sharper, unbreakable, and knowing that the girl left at the altar had died that day. In her place stood a woman no one would ever dare to underestimate again.